Okay, hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here with us today. I'm Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and very excited for a conversation with Amelia Shachoy, former Assistant Director for the U.S. Government Accountability Office and former New York City Office of Management and Budget. We are very grateful for our ALN Platinum member Onuma system, and more about upcoming events with Onuma soon. Also, big thank you to our patron members, Definitive Logic, a Mantech company, CGI, ABS Quality Evaluations, and Jacobs. Thank you very much for your continued support, as well as the support of all our organizational members, which really make programming like this and our newsletter and upcoming events possible. So thank you very much. And if you're out there watching and are thinking, maybe I'd like to work with the ALN, please reach out. We love collaborating. It's a goal to partner with every organization in the world because we have global goals and like working with people, getting involved. So with that, I think Mike's going to come on and talk a little about the upcoming events. And I'll just make one more note that if you're out there watching, we'd love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat, or you can use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. Mike Bordonaro, Executive Director, welcome.
Thank you, Nick. And yes, we're looking forward to talking with Amelia. We've been talking about next week's ALN AI Brainstorm Tree Storm for a while, and Amelia was excited about it. Turns out everybody loves trees. We're getting our strongest response to our activities from this, and part of this is the passion people are bringing to their different asset categories. But what we want is for Tree Storm to help people focus on the structure of the asset management governance remotely from what they're typically working on, except if you're in the forestry industry, this is what you're working on. But anyway, and trees seems to hook onto a lot of people. Then we discovered tiny forest movement, and it really helped us solidify what we're going to be doing, looking at trees as an asset. And Nick mentioned Kimono Onuma. He's going to use the same approach of the building as an asset, the space in the building as an asset, the things in the building as an asset. Well, a tiny forest is a defined space, and the trees in that tiny forest can be managed with similar tools and processes that can then be translated into other categories. And with trees, this tiny forest movement, you densely plant shrubs, mid-level trees, and canopy trees together. They compete and grow faster, and in 20 years you've got 100 years worth of growth, typical, and the related measurements of carbon reduction and oxygen increase. And for the people who have called us tree huggers on this program, and there have been, and Daniel Platts from the UN took that as a compliment, but even the US Navy manages its own forest because the white oak was running out, and that is the type of wood that's needed to maintain the US Constitution. So trees are important to everyone, and let's look at them as an asset separate from what we typically look at assets, and learn how to apply the asset management governance processes for trees over into our other areas. So Nick, you're the co-chair of the ALN Trees Asset Leadership Board. What have you been learning from this exploration?
Thanks for asking, Mike. As so often as I've found in the last few years, thinking about asset management, we look elsewhere in the world for leadership, to Canada often. And Canada is similar in this regard. They're a little further along, maybe a little more mature in their understanding of the value of trees and forests in urban settings as well as more rural. And just amazing kind of process they've taken to bring the public opinion and awareness up to speed on how important trees are as an ecosystem asset, as things that, you know, as in a changing and a warming climate, things that can help keep our cities warm and cool in the summer with their shade canopy, and also, you know, clear the air of pollutants. And I've even been reading about their benefits in mental health and other things. So Trees
Excellent.
are an amazing asset, and I'm very excited to talk more about how we can use our asset management governance to better manage them and get the value for all of us.
One of the interesting things, our Canadian colleagues introduced us to a natural asset inventory standard that was just published earlier this year. And while that standard is excellent in helping you understand the process for inventory your natural assets, it does nothing to talk about the management, the design, the planning, the measurement of the value of those assets. And that's all the things our tree storm is going to be addressing. So very interesting development there. And before we get to Amelia, after the tree storm, we're going to be focusing on airports. And we're going to have a half-hour program on October 26th with Jennifer Mims. She is the co-chair of the ALN Airports Asset Leadership Board. And then on November 9th, we're going to have a full-hour program with Brian Oldham, the Senior Director of Asset Management at Denver International Airport. So lots of good things in store. Thanks for the extra long introduction before we get to Amelia. Hello, Amelia, how you doing? Oh, you're on mute. So
doing well. It's good to see you.
yeah, we haven't talked with you for a while. So why don't you give us an update on where you're at and how you're doing? You're looking good and looking happy.
Thank you. Yes, it's good to see you both. You know, I left GAO at the end of April. I was there for 23 years. And
Wow.
at GAO, I spent the last 10 years in the physical infrastructure group at GAO. But I also worked in other groups before that, before I reached PI, physical infrastructure. I worked in our audit policy and quality assurance group for a couple of years. And I worked in our CNSA contracting and national security acquisitions group. And then when I started at GAO, when I came from New York City OMB, I came into the strategic issues group at GAO, which did work on intergovernmental relations between state, local, and federal government, intergovernmental coordination. So I did a few different things while I was there. Before that, I worked for New York City Office of Management and Budget.
And what are you interested in doing now?
Well, you know, I have expertise in those areas, so I guess there are a few different things. I also work for the school system in New York as a director of operations. So I have a variety of experience, a lot of different things. I'm particularly interested in asset management oversight, because, you know, GAO is an oversight agency. GAO does not, some people think that GAO actually manages. We do not manage, they do not manage anything. It's an oversight agency.
Okay, so anybody out there looking to get some incredible expertise in asset management oversight might want to send a note. And Keith Cunningham sent a note saying they missed you over at the GAO.
Thanks. That's nice. Also, I do have a small art practice, so we'll see.
That's one of the things we wanted to talk with you about, because you have this expertise in infrastructure asset management and you understand trees as an asset, as tangible and intangible assets. We thought this would be a good way to start bringing interest to the discussion of value from trees as assets. So what is your interest in trees?
Well, trees, there's a lot to say about trees, and I sent you all a reading list of a lot of different books. But first I was thinking of starting with some GAO reports.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead.
I was just going to say, what GAO reports are you interested in talking about?
Reports. While I was at GAO, I oversaw the work, the research and analysis and the writing of 2 reports. I had great teams. I didn't do that work alone, but 2 reports. The first one, as you all, I think many of you are familiar with, is GAO 1957, where we developed an asset management framework. This one here. Nick, I don't know if you want to put it in the chat, but the title is Agencies Could Benefit from Additional Information on Leading Practices. And in that report, we developed an asset management framework with 6 key characteristics. And those characteristics were developed from research with a number of international asset management experts, as well as various other some people might be on the Zoom call right now, but a number of interviews, as well as research on different standards, including the ISO 55000 standards. And we made one recommendation in that report to the Office of Management and Budget, Federal Office of Management and Budget. One recommendation, which OMB did not comment on, but it was recognized by the international asset management community, mostly engineers. And that recommendation, which I think you're familiar with it, but it was that, I have it here, that OMB should improve existing information on federal asset management to reflect leading practices such as those in ISO 55000 and the 6 key characteristics that we developed in our framework. So that was really highly recognized. Aside from OMB, OMB has not taken action. I don't believe OMB has taken action, but there's another report that
But
we
before we move on from that one,
Sure.
many federal agencies did take action. The amount of involvement from federal agencies after the report came out increased dramatically. And it is, I'm sure, tied to that report that did reference Canada.
Yes.
And so there's a theme, a consistent theme here today.
Yes, we had a whole appendix on Canada. And
Yeah.
for that report, we actually traveled to Canada. One of my team members and I, Alex Fidel, I don't think he's on the call, but he's based in our Chicago office, GAO's Chicago office. And Alex and I traveled to Canada. We went to Hamilton. We drove, it's funny, we drove in the evening, in the night, after some meetings in Hamilton, we drove to Ottawa, Ontario. It's about a 6-hour drive in a snowstorm. And so that was really interesting. But the work in Canada really informed our work, because Canada is a leader in asset management.
We seem to have.
Are you there?
Oh, yeah, we lost you for
we're
a
getting
minute.
a
Amelia.
little interruption. So Canada is a leader in asset management. And then what's the next GAO report you wanted to reference?
The next one is one we did on climate, natural disaster resilience, climate change. Well, we weren't supposed to say climate change, but natural disaster resilience. Climate change was not politically popular at the time. I think it might have changed.
What's the
but
number?
Anyway,
What's the number for that?
21596. Nick could put it in the chat if he wants to.
596.
596.
Yes.
So that one, we also made one recommendation to OMB, as we did with the first. OMB did not comment on that recommendation. But since our work was for Senate, Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, the Senate did propose legislation and it was passed by the Congress. So OMB was required to do something. And they did take some action. They updated A11. But I'm not sure if that fully met the requirement of the recommendation. I think GAO is still making that determination.
Okay. And now to the heart of the program. Is it time for discussion about your involvement and interest in trees?
Well, I wanted to speak briefly about a Canadian botanist. Her name is Suzanne Simard. I know we have to watch the time, but Suzanne Simard is a Canadian.
I think we're going to go long, Amelia, so don't worry.
Well, we'll see how much stamina I have, but British Columbia Canadian botanist who is also a forester. And she is a professor at the university, I believe it's the University of British Columbia. And she talks a lot, she has a book, Finding Mother Tree. I think I sent that to you all as a recommended book. She also has a number of YouTube videos. If you want to Google her, you can find YouTube videos. She has a recent one that's it says, "Our economy drives deforestation." She talks about the economy, she talks about art, she talks about trees. She has a very interesting background, but the main thing is that she writes about the connection in forests and that you have to look at systems. I think it's similar to what you all are doing with tiny forests. Not exactly the same, similar. She writes about symbiosis among trees, that the web of roots are joined together under the ground, that trees grow together, and that there's there's a recognition among trees, and they help each other. They talk to each other underground. And some people have some questions about that, but she's a botanist, and she's done a lot of research on that. She's written books. She has a whole body of research, and she has students at the university who work with her as researchers. They continue to do this research. But the book, I mentioned to you the book, The Overstory by Richard Powers. This book is somewhat based on her research. There's a character in this book who's modeled on her. Richard Powers developed one character in the book on Suzanne Simard. It's the scientist in the book. And also there's a character in this book modeled on the Douglas fir tree. And Suzanne Simard's research shows that there's a kinship recognition among Douglas firs. When you plant the seedlings, I'm not a botanist, but when you plant the seedlings, when you remove some seedlings, the Douglas fir trees rebound. So that's an interesting sidebar.
So
But
Nick has read The Overstory. What were your impressions, Nick?
It's been a little while, but it wove a number of different narratives. At one end of the spectrum is, the eco-terrorist that sees deforestation, happening and goes to stop that from happening outside the law. And there are a lot of other stories woven into the Overstory that really just, I was never a big tree lover myself. I always saw trees, appreciated them mildly. And then the more I've learned about them and through real good narratives like the Overstory, have really developed a more emotional connection. And then now through this body of work around how valuable forests are in an urban setting and generally, I have a totally new appreciation and really glad that there are some leaders in Canada and elsewhere that are applying, the best practices that we've learned can be applied to any assets to trees.
Well, Canada is not only a leader in asset management for physical infrastructure, it's also a leader in addressing climate change.
So talking about Canada, I forgot to mention I'm in Miami this week for a ports conference because the ALN AI brainstorm port storm has really taken off internationally, and the concepts that are being advocated, the way that we're working and workshopping these leadership ideas are starting to resonate. And I am hoping that Tree Storm is also seen as a new way of looking at things. And a tiny forest is not going to replace everything that's being burnt down. It's not going to replace everything that's going to be chopped down, but it can help people understand the principles of asset management and how to get value and measure value from things in ways that might replicate to all the assets. We need to take care of all of our assets better for us to have the better life for all 8 billion of us. So now we get into why people are passionate about certain assets. And can I ask you now about what started your passion for trees, Amelia?
Well, I've always lived in cities. I grew up in Baltimore. I went to college in Boston. Then I went to New York City for my graduate school at Columbia University. And then I started working for the city of New York. Then I moved to Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. I also lived in Paris, France. So I've always lived in cities, but I love trees and I love being in the country and being in the outdoors. Trees are, well, we can't live without trees, as you know. And we can move to some art in a minute, but one thing that Suzanne Simard says is that when we cut down trees, we release carbon. And so when you cut down mature forests, you're releasing carbon. And we already have very high carbon emissions. So, and that's, in our climate, that affects the climate.
Extremism. Yes.
What? Sorry?
Extreme weather is the way to explain it. And
Well,
that seems,
we mentioned extreme weather in that GAO 21-596. But she also says that, let me just check one thing. She says just that we have to be aware of the consequences. When we're cutting down forests, we have to be aware of the consequences of what we're doing. And she says we have about 10 years to address the climate issue around the world. And of course, the developed countries are more responsible, you know, the United States, Europe, some of the other countries, but it's not all of the countries that are responsible for this. So anyway, that's just a little bit more about what she says.
so your passion for trees, because you live in the city and you like outdoorsness, resulted in you taking pictures, and then that
Yeah,
resulted
right.
in.
Right. So I have a small art practice. I also have a certificate from the Corcoran College of Art and Design, which is now at GW, George Washington University. But when I went there, it was at the Corcoran Gallery of Art, which is now closed. It was a private museum, but it's one of the few museum schools in the country. And I have a certificate. I got that. I went to classes in the evenings and on weekends while I was working at GAO. I have that certificate, and I have a small art practice, but we can look at some trees. What I do is I take photographs and then I make paintings and other work based on the photographs.
All right, I'm calling that up. It's the next one. Oh, I gotta stop share and resize the PowerPoint so that it's not full screen, and then go back into it. Sorry for the delay.
By the way, I see some comments in the chat. I agree with Jack Kelly. He's describing what OMB does. And I see a comment here that something about OMB. I think Cecilia wrote something about OMB, but I disagree. I agree with Jack.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to keep up with the chat and the live discussion, but thanks for doing your best, Amelia.
So I can tell you a little bit about these. This one, just quickly, we're going to go quickly through these. This is in Central Park in New York City in the autumn, just a big tree, fall foliage. This one is in eastern Delaware on the coast, eastern shore of Delaware. This was taken after a hurricane, and the sun was coming through the trees. I just thought it was a pretty photograph. This is a great photograph. This shows the roots. And Suzanne Simard, writes about the roots and how trees talk to each other through their roots. This one is in the Shenandoah in Virginia. This is another one, just looking at the branches. This is a great photo. This was taken in West Virginia this summer. This is a 700-year-old tree.
Wow. People loving that one.
The ribbons, I'm not sure. I think it was we did not put the ribbons on. I think it's somehow to, honor the tree. This is a great photo. This was taken during the pandemic. I took a lot of walks during the pandemic. This is in Washington, D.C., just showing the tree. Obviously, this tree is probably not, well, I see some green. It's probably not doing too well, but you can look inside and see the trunk of the tree.
So then you use those as the basis for?
Right. This is one of my paintings. This is autumn, it's supposed to show autumn foliage. So my paintings are very flat. I'm not really interested in depth, but I'm interested in shape and color. So this is autumn. You can see the trees are talking to each other through their branches. Trees are interconnected. This is one I like. This is a collage. It's Japanese paper with acrylic. And the trees are interconnected. So that's what I'm showing. This is another one, Japanese paper and acrylic. Oh, this one I like. This is colored pencil and crayon. This was done in the Berkshires in New York State, not far from Albany. This one, I really like this one. This is more abstract. It's acrylic, and it's just showing the branches of the trees.
So how does, and what's over your shoulder?
Oh, yes, thank you for asking. This is a work by Patricia Underwood. She does work on trees, and it is a print she had a show. She's an interesting artist. I don't know if you can tell, it's the trunk of a tree. Can you see it's a trunk of a tree,
Yes.
like a branch. So it's got a print of a trunk of a tree and a branch on top of it. Her name is Patricia Underwood. She had an exhibit. If any of you are in the DMV area, she had an exhibit at the Athenaeum in Alexandria, Virginia.
Yeah.
And there's another exhibit right there now, which is a really great exhibit. It's also at the Athenaeum by Anne Stein. Her title of the show is Every Rock Has a Story. And this show is up until October 15th, and she's giving an artist talk on Sunday, this Sunday at the Athenaeum, if anyone wants to stop by.
So that gets us to trees as an intangible, the intangible assets that trees provide, because we're going to be doing some very specific measurements, tree canopies, the breast height tree diameter. That's how they describe it. It's when you're standing up, your chest height is where you do not at the ground, it's like 4 feet. And then also there are measurements for carbon dioxide in an area and oxygen in an area. There are forest fire alarms, and they can put alarms in a forest and then know how to go more directly to the place where a fire starts and help fires from spreading. There's all kinds of ways of measuring trees. We're going to be focusing on the tiny forest, but then there's the intangible aspect, and clearly the art that it inspires is an intangible asset in your life.
Mike, and I just want to note that, some people might be thinking, why do we need all these ways of measuring trees? And it's the same in so many asset management contexts where it's like, but we have so many, why do we need to measure all of them in all these different ways? And it's just one of the core principles. You got to start by understanding what you have before you can come up with a good way to manage it, really. And Amelia was saying how trees store carbon dioxide, and I was thinking one of my favorite quotes around this subject is how so many assets devalue over time, where trees grow in value and maybe even exponentially so in their ability to sequester carbon and in the carbon they've already sequestered, and the canopy they provide, etc.
Which goes to the point of the tiny forest movement, which is to enhance that quality and to help trees accelerate their growth and get to 100-year forest level in 10 years. And the idea is not necessarily about trees as assets, which is great. This is, we've got a lot of things going here, but the founder of the Forest Institute, who is very interested in this and has said he will attend, but he's in India next week. I'm not making any promises or holding my breath about his attendance. But he was working for Toyota when Mr. Miyawaki did a tiny forest project for Toyota, and then Subhendu Sharma quit engineering for cars and started engineering for trees, and now he's helped more than 100 forests around the world. And it's not necessarily just about the tiny forest, because we know that the fires are reducing way more than the tiny forest can replace. But it's using a tiny forest in a place like Toyota to teach people asset management concepts, principles, practices. And we'll see if it takes off as much as the ports storm took off.
I just
Mike,
want to
go for it, Amelia.
Okay, one quick point on a smaller scale. In the District of Columbia, we have Casey trees. And that was an initiative, it's a not-for-profit organization, an initiative started by Mrs. Casey to create more tree space in the District of Columbia. So you'll see trees planted, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you'll see trees planted around that are planted by Casey trees at no cost to DC.
Excellent.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Nick?
I'll let you know if it comes back to me.
Okay, I know how that goes. Yeah, there's so many of these. We're finding so many groups like Casey Trees, and the foresters are doing excellent work in management, and many municipalities have their trees mapped and LiDAR and NIDAR. We're not saying that there isn't great work going on in the tree as asset category. It is being done. We're just trying to show how this tiny forest movement fits in well with our evangelism for asset management governance. And we think that bringing these together will be hopefully inspiration for people to start looking at ways to expand asset management. We're talking with the United Nations and other groups about how we can continue this even before it has gotten officially started.
Mike, I think the tiny forests and trees in general is another great way for us to try and reach more people, because obviously trees seem to inspire and elicit more passions than the average industrial plant machinery. Like trees are just something everyone has experience with, and a lot of people we're finding have an emotional connection to, or some connection outside of purely just the service that trees provide. And so I think that's a great thing, because something we've found is that logic and good reasoning for doing asset management doesn't always do it. Oftentimes it takes an emotional connection or a story being told that brings it home, makes it personal. So I really like that we're focusing on something that people can connect with on an individual basis, and using that as a springboard to continue talking about best practice asset management.
That's really interesting, the personal connection, because Suzanne Simard writes about that. And if you look for her YouTube, she talks about that. It's only, I think, 15 minutes. Her YouTube video, Our Economy Drives Deforestation, I think it's fairly recent, where she's interviewed, I think she's in London in the UK, being interviewed about, she just received a prize or something, but she does write about our personal relationship with trees. Oh, and one quick thing. I know we're running out of time, but she is a cancer survivor, and her cancer drug was developed from the yew tree.
Well, that makes me love it even more. So officially this is concluded, but there's some things that I want to continue to explore with Amelia. If anybody has to leave because they only allocated a half hour, that is fine. But one of the things we're doing with Tree Storm is connecting it to economic value. And that starts getting into the intangible realm. And what Amelia has done is taken a passion for an asset category. People don't think of trees as an asset category, they just think of them as trees, but she's taken her passion and turned that into an intangible value. So it's not just the value of the tree, it's the value of the art that has been inspired, and there is additional value from that. What values do you get, Amelia, when you're painting?
Oh gosh, that's kind of a big question. Like I said, I love nature, I love the outdoors. So when I go out and take photographs, then I'm in nature, and then I use the photographs to create the paintings. So the values, it's all about the environment as well. Even though it's a painting, it's about the environment. It's about the trees and how the trees are interconnected. And engineering, architecture, science, and art, it's all connected.
Hmm? And that's one of the things that Jim Dieter has helped us understand, is that asset management melts away the silos, tears down the divisions between people who are focused on a single mission. An organization, a good organization, has a single mission or two, and people are so involved in their part of the work that sometimes they lose sight of the entire mission. And the asset management aspect really ties people together
Right.
in that regard.
Well, that's what the asset management framework that we developed in GAO 1957, that's what that's trying to communicate.
And I think that framework does it better than any of the other asset management frameworks we've seen. So
Well, that's a
thank
great,
you.
that's a great compliment.
Thank you for that work. Oh, no, it's really complex subject.
Yes, it
You
is.
know, and to have a visual aid that allows people to grasp, get their hands around something that might be hard to get your entire mind around. And that's one of the reasons I am a strong advocate for visualization of data that helps people say, I see what you're talking about relative to complex subjects.
Well, that's,
And
sorry, go ahead.
no,
No, I think that's one thing that GAO really tries to do, simplify the concept. You know, we were always told that our reports had to be for like the lay reader. They're not made for experts.
we've done a good job of that. And like I said, I believe it was that report that really started the federal asset management movement. There were organizations that were involved in asset management prior to that, but after that report came out, boom, everybody showed up and the discussion got much richer. So I think we have addressed the different comments. Is there anything else you would like to add, Nick or Amelia?
Yeah, one thought that came to me when you mentioned the economic impact or value of trees. And in this report I was reading, it was saying there was a study done showing that greener cities, literally greener cities that have more trees and foliage are saving potentially billions per year in environmental costs, in reduced environmental related costs. And I can only imagine that margin of how much you can reduce those environmental costs will increase as climate change continues.
Right.
And
the idea is tiny forests are doable, and doesn't mean that a city can only have one tiny forest. So the idea is to, start a real groundswell and learn from the tiny forest and take the learning from there and apply it to broader areas.
yeah, I'm very excited for the AI brainstorm tree storm. And one more reason being that you were getting into the data visualization aspect a little bit and how helpful that can be. And I'm thinking of that slide you showed where there's that 10 by 10 meter tiny forest plot. And then it has all these rings showing the various canopies of the different trees. And it's like, you're gonna make a digital twin of a 10 by 10 meter tiny forest. What use could that be? And then you get in there and you're like, oh, because there's a lot of things to keep track of in here. And yeah, if there's one person that manages that tiny forest for their and its entire life, they might know everything about it, but it's such a complex ecosystem that it makes so much sense to keep track of everything in that in visual ways, in spreadsheets, having data that you can manipulate, and then just the importance of that, I think, is coming through a little bit with this example.
Thank you. Took me a while to get it, but there's that slide. So Amelia, did you have any closing comments?
Well, just first of all, I think it's great what you all are doing with tiny forests. And I look forward to, I think next week, right? You have a discussion.
That's it.
Right. And also just one last thing, it's all about relationships. That's what I think. It's, trees, the environment, people, we're all interconnected, we're all related, and we can't live without each other.
Well, I love that. That's probably the best closing that we've ever had on ALN Thursday at 3. I am not surprised. I've been waiting a long time to have you back. Look forward to you getting some asset management consulting so you can come and report on that, or we'll have you back for other topics.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
as Keith Cunningham said, you're missed. So we'll figure out ways of getting you involved.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
And so thank you very much, Amelia, for joining us. And thank you to our patron member, Onuma Inc., and our ALN patron members, Definitive Logic, which is now a Mantech company, CGI, ABS Quality Evaluations, and Jacobs, and all of our organizational members. We're looking to sign up a new one down here in Miami as part of this ports activity. And I really appreciate the support. And we've already talked about next week enough, so we'll just go on and look beyond that to ALN Airports Asset Leadership Board. We're going to have a focus on that at the end of October, beginning of November. And we want to thank Andrew James Advisory Group for providing the ALN A55 Professional Certification Training course. Next one's November 6th, so there's still time to sign up for that. And again, thank you, Amelia, and really appreciate everyone's participation and interest in this, and we look forward to talking to you all next week.
Yep.
Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.